Okay, welcome everyone. It's our final night in our study in the book of Judges. Excuse me. So, we'll get started with some prayer and we'll talk about where we're headed. Well, Father God, we want to invite your presence here once again tonight. We thank you that your word is here and your Holy Spirit has filled each and every one of us who are confessing your name as our Savior, Lord God, and I pray that your Spirit would guide us and lead us in all truth. Once again, we would truly understand why you have included not only the book of Judges, but these last chapters in the book, Lord, for us to know and learn from, to apply in our lives, what to do, what not to do, and why the history of the nation that you call your own people is the way it is back in the history that we're looking at, as well as in the world that we live in today. So I pray that we would glean everything you would have for us, Lord, and that we would honor you for giving us this truth to study and to appreciate tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, we are in the final two chapters of a 21-chapter book of Judges, so it's chapters 20 and 21. Last time, and as we closed out this sort of epilogue section of the book of Judges, we are looking at, I would say this is mostly the last five chapters from 17 through 21, is mostly about what's going on with the tribe of Dan, or what happened with the tribe of Dan and what's going on. We've seen that, of course, we had two Levites, and the second Levite had a concubine, and last week we talked about the really just wicked actions of the men of Gibeah, what they did to this Levite's concubine, and how she was she was taken to the point of death, and he found her that way in the morning. He wasn't exactly a man of upright character and morals or whatever else in the way he conducted himself, certainly as a Levite, which is concerning. But what we got to last time was, hey, this event took place. This Levite was in the town of Gibeah, and he needed to stay somewhere. No one would give him hospitality, and until an older man came along and offered him a room at that night. Excuse me, sorry, I was going to try and stop that. He offered him the room for the night, but the men of the city saw that this Levite had come into town, and they wanted to bring him out, and as it says in the Hebrew, know him, and as it adds in the English to help for clarity, know him carnally, meaning with sexual male-on-male conditions there. He's going to tell us in his recount of the events tonight that he believed they wanted to kill him, which could very well be the case, but there was obviously nefarious actions and intentions of these men all the way through. So, as we closed out last week, we saw the man was obviously quite upset and he's seeking justice, and so he cuts up this corpse of his concubine wife and sends her out to the 11 or 12 tribes of Israel for them to get word that he really wants to have a meeting to explain what happened and why he is seeking justice. And that's where we open in the chapter 20 tonight, and we'll, again, close out the book. So, again, if I didn't include in all of that, all of those events that we talked about in the last chapter and a half of last week's study, and then tonight all of study, all of this is really centered on the tribe of Dan. So Gibeah is in the tribal territory of Dan, of Benjamin. Did I say Dan? Benjamin. Did I say that all the way wrong all the way through? Benjamin is who we're talking about. So this tribe of Gibeah is in Benjamin, and we're talking about them there. So, I guess I messed up. So Benjamin is kind of just above where Judah sits. So if you think of Judah and Jerusalem sort of being at the top of that, Benjamin sort of sits up above in there. Later, they kind of get collapsed into the tribe of Judah because of their dwindling size, which we see here tonight. So, They're to be the intermediaries, those who go between sinful man and God as the representatives of God, telling the people how they're to conduct themselves, or If they got leprosy, then they need to be going to a priest, a Levite, to say, am I okay to be back in society again, or do I need to isolate myself? So they had all of these rules that they alone had to follow, and they were basically dispersed through the nation, all the other tribes of Israel. So they didn't get their own property; they only had cities to dwell in. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's when we get here to these last 5 chapters where it first talks about the Levite and the first one who goes and they establish the territory of Dan. And then the second one, and he goes into Gibeah and ends up in the situation we're in here. There's this repeated phrase, especially prevalent in the last 5 chapters, which is there was no king in Israel and everyone did what was right in their own eyes or his own eyes or however it phrases it. So, there is this sense that the Levites have lost any sense of their own moral connection to God's law, and therefore they are not helping the rest of the nations to live righteously before him or in compliance with the law that Moses was given. So, all right. Having messed up that, so I think I conflated Dan and Benjamin there at the top of the hour. So anyway, let's get back to this whole thing now centers on the tribe of Benjamin, and let's talk about what's going on here. So having received a message contained in the dissected or dismembered body of the concubine, Israel is going to all gather together in the region of Benjamin, in the region of Gibeah, and begin to ask for justice for what happened to the concubine, and really for the Levite as well. So, starting in chapter 20, verse 1. So all the children of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba. That's the first time we really see that phrase, because that's the first time they were established in the north. So Dan to Beersheba is a north to south designation. As well as from the land of Gilead, which is Transjordan, and on the congregation gathered together as one man before Yahweh at Mizpah. And the leaders of all the people, all the tribes of Israel, presented themselves in the assembly of God, 400,000 foot soldiers who drew the sword. Now the children of Benjamin heard that the children of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. Then the children of Israel said, "Tell us, how did this wicked deed happen?" So the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, "My concubine and I went into Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin, to spend the night. And the men of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house at night because of me. They intended to kill me, but instead they ravished my concubine so that she died. So I took hold of my concubine, cut her into pieces, and sent her throughout all the territory of the inheritance of Israel, because they committed lewdness and outrage in Israel. Look, all of you are children of Israel. Give your advice and counsel here and now." So all the people arose as one man, saying, "None of us will go to his tent, nor will any turn back to his house. But now this is the thing which we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot. We will take 10 men out of every 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, 100 out of every 1,000, and 1,000 out of every 10,000, to make provisions for the people, that when they come to Gibeah in Benjamin, they may repay all the vileness that they have done in Israel." So all the men of Israel were gathered against the city and united together as one man. All right, so let's walk through what we just took a look at here in the text. So having received this morbid message, as I'll call it, about the murdered concubine, all of the men, both military and leaders, the tribal leaders or the elders of the tribes, gather together to hear the case to decide what should be done. Now the leaders of the tribes came, as it says, as I mentioned already, from Dan to Beersheba, as well as from the land of Gilead, which we looked at several different times over there on the Transjordan side of events that took place over there in the book of Judges. So we're getting both the Transjordan, or the 2.5 tribes that are on the east side of the Jordan, and then the 9.5 tribes or whatever on the west side of the Jordan. So the record declares that out of all of this that gathered, 400,000 foot soldiers had come together with their leaders, and all of them were ready to go to war if necessary in order to bring justice to this matter. So they hadn't made a decision yet as to what they would do. They all came prepared to go to battle, but they were waiting to hear the evidence, waiting to hear the case that was being made. Why are we all gathered here? Why is it that Gibeah has come up on everybody's radar in terms of why do we need to talk about it? So the leaders, it seems that the leaders from the tribe of Benjamin were aware of this large gathering that took place at Mizpah, but did not participate in, or at least contribute to the discussions about their city that was in their own territory, right? So I mean, picture this, but you've got these 10 or 11 or 12, 12 tribes total, and Levite, I'm not sure exactly how you fit them in. You never know exactly which tribes you're counting here, but they get the, let's say 11 tribes together. They gather here at Mizpah. Benjamin's like, they're gathering, and we probably got the message. Maybe they even received a part of the woman's, severed body, but they aren't necessarily in there saying, hey, why are you talking about a city in our land, right? They seem to be somewhat silent about what's going on here. So they either know about it and didn't participate, or they're listening, but they aren't going to, make a case for why Gibeah shouldn't be judged yet. So let's talk mainly about the other tribes, the leaders from the other tribes. They asked to hear directly from the victim or victims what actually took place. So they're asking for a recounting of how all this came to bear and why, give us a reason why we've gathered here in this way. So this Levite husband of the concubine then begins to explain the events of the night that took place, where his wife had died. Though, of course, and this is almost always the case, any role that he played in what happened here, not that he's, guilty of making bad decisions per se, other than sending his concubine out, he's going to minimize his role to the extreme, and he's just going to talk about what they were doing. So he talks about how he and his concubine, and he also had this, servant that was with him, had traveled to Gibeah in Benjamin, and they needed to spend the night there because they couldn't get all the way home without spending the night in the town. He says, but however, the men of Gibeah, after first refusing to give him any lodging, rose against him and surrounded the house where he was staying for the night. And then the Levite openly declares that he by his recounting, although it wasn't mentioned last chapter, he says the men intended to kill him who went outside. He doesn't mention to know him. So he doesn't mention that they demanded to know him carnally. He just mentions that if I went out to them, they would have killed me. And that's probably true based on what happened to the concubine. But he's leaving out he entirely leaves out the sexual component of what they were demanding of him, which seemed to be a gross, both gross in the real sense, but issue that you would think that most of Israel would be outraged by. They wanted to do what? Didn't that happen at Sodom and Gomorrah? If God judged Sodom and Gomorrah, wouldn't he bring judgment upon us if we allowed such wickedness to take place? And so he kind of leaves that out. I'm not sure why. We're not told why. He also, of course, doesn't mention how his concubine came to be separated from him and was taken by the men of the city, right? He literally, in the way it reads to me, he pushed her out the door, right? I mean, he's in the house. They're demanding him. They offer, the virgin daughter of the old man, and they offer the concubine of the Levite. And we're not sure what happened with the daughters, but it seems like the man, in fear of his life, pushed his concubine out the door and said, take her, just spare me the trouble. That's what it seems like to me. If you have a different interpretation, that's your choice, of course. But it seems to me that he was not reluctant to let her take the brunt, literally, of what these men intended to do. So then he describes how the men spent the entire night violently ravishing this concubine woman until she was left for dead. Maybe she had a few heartbeats left, a few breaths left in her lungs, but by the time he's ready to travel in the morning, she's dead. So then he describes how he took this corpse of his dead concubine wife and cut her up into pieces, because he did it with the intention of demanding to bring justice against the people, the men of Gibeah. And he couldn't do it himself, obviously. He's one man. And so he's demanding that those who have authority, power, and ability to bring justice over the situation, not let it just die like, well, sorry, it's tough to be you. I guess we'll just live with it. No, he's calling for justice. He wants justice for himself, of what they did to him or threatened to do to him, and the loss of his concubine wife, and also, of course, the fact that they ravished her sexually and to the point of death in all of this. Yeah, true love. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is a sense that the value for human life, the value for the life of a concubine, unfortunately, even in some cases, it seems not by God's design, but by man's approach. Even the value of women is lower than the value of men at certain stages of the history, and then. And certainly, of slaves or something like that, they somewhat treated as subhuman. I think we have a far more biblical approach to the value of human life in our understanding, New Testament understanding. But yeah, there's a sense of certain people are disposable or expendable, and there is this caste system or class system or whatever, and a woman who's a concubine, somewhat analogous to a slave, is going to be considered more expendable than her master. Yeah. Okay, so the men had committed lewdness and an unspeakable outrage in Israel, and so the Levite is in fact demanding that they bring justice. So he requests that the men make a judgment right here today, basically. I've told you what happened, you tell me what you're going to do about it. And it didn't take much convincing or persuasion. All the men who were gathered there were in unity, it says. So they were all kind of speaking as one man. Yes, it doesn't exactly precisely tell us what they want to do, but we'll see it as the rest of the chapter unfolds. All the men who were gathered were in unity and made a vow, standing there, not to return to their homes, their tents, their homes, any place else. They would not leave their gathering together until justice was served upon the men of Gibeah dwelling in Benjamin. So initially, they did not intend to hold the rest of Benjamin accountable for their actions. So here's what we're going to see, and we haven't gotten to that part yet, but we're going to see that really it seems the Levite himself and then all of the men, the leaders of Israel, and these 400,000 soldiers who are gathered, they're like the men of Gibeah need to be brought to justice. What they never said at this time was the men of Benjamin are also guilty because it happened in their territory and they didn't do anything about it. What they're only concerned about is the men who participated in this act in the land of Gibeah or in the town or city of Gibeah. But that's not how it's going to unfold and shake out as we go. So because they had brought 400,000, and let's say no doubt that the tribe of Benjamin couldn't amass, it's going to be recorded somewhere in the 30,000 range. Let's say guaranteed they couldn't amass more than 50,000 people to repel this judgment against Gibeah. 400,000 versus 30, 40, 50,000. They said, well, it's way too much, so we're going to pare down this because, well, there's issues if you send too many people. So, one way to do it, or one way to look at it, is sending too many soldiers could create confusion rather than a benefit against a relatively small, in comparison, opposing group of men. Any of you can just think about strategies in military and all that kind of stuff, if you've been in it or not. You can think about how sending an overwhelming number of men into a town and say, okay, go slaughter everybody, who's wearing what clothing and what uniform and who's my enemy, and all of a sudden there can be these great moments of confusion. You kind of need to make sure that everybody's there on task and focused on what they need to do. So sending too many soldiers was potentially tactically a bad choice. However, I would also interject here that some confusion could result from these men from different tribes who've never ever served together in a battle, right? You're going to go, okay, we're going to take 1 out of 10 and 10 out of 100 and 100 out of 1,000 or 10,000 or whatever. And you go, okay, so you guys all go into battle together. And you're like, oh, well, who are you? And I think there's some opportunities there also for men who have not trained together, not been tested together, haven't worked together going into battle. So all of these scenarios you can just imagine would be challenging to go, okay, how do we win this battle? Sending all 400,000 might be a little bit overwhelming, and yet maybe they should have taken men who were like, you're my brother from the tribe of Judah, so let's all go fight first. But they're also, they don't want to decimate a tribe, let's say, because Judah's going to get called to go in first and go, well, we lost all of the tribe of Judah trying to get Benjamin, so now we're going to send another, and so they're trying to pace out, because a lot of death can most certainly occur, certainly did occur in the midst of all of this. So there's some real logistical, tactical challenges here they're trying to face as they approach bringing justice to Gibeah. And I think they've already, at least looked at it in the sense of it's probably not going to be all these men come out and say, yeah, I'm guilty, please take me and bring justice to me. There's going to be a battle over these men, these wicked men from Gibeah. Mm-hmm.
Isn't the tribe of Benjamin part of Israel's even then?
Yeah, what we're looking at is Benjamin is a subset of Israel, but in this particular account, in this historical event, Benjamin is going to oppose everyone else. So I'm saying Benjamin against the other 11 tribes or whatever who are able to go to war. Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
If they've got a potential for 400,000, which is not too much less than the city of Spokane,
Yeah.
they're going to be drawing from the area of like 2 million people to get 400,000. You're going to have
Yeah. Women and children and all that, yeah.
You think then get those guys all gathered in one spot and travel, and I mean, just to make that happen at all, it seems crazy.
That's those are the numbers we're dealing with. So we know that somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 million people came out of Egypt under Moses, and they traveled in the wilderness for 40 years. Some tribes grew a little bit in the wilderness, others shrank quite a bit in the wilderness for 40 years. But there's a huge number of people, and everything that we're looking at here, and we'll see it again as this chapter unfolds. This is happening right after the time of Joshua. So we're still talking, literally about a couple million people who have populated into the land of Israel at some point in time. And 400,000 soldiers would not be at all an overestimation based on the counts and the censuses that were taken in the book of Numbers. I don't know about food supplies and logistics and water and all the stuff that goes along there, but we don't. Yeah, no, it doesn't tell us, doesn't give us any seasonal, response. Yeah, right. Okay, so here we'll look at the first account here of how, Israel has decided that justice must be brought, and Benjamin as a whole tribe is going to say, we're not going to allow that, okay? So then the tribes of Israel, this is how it's described in the text here in Judges 20, verse 12. Then the tribes of Israel sent men through all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, what is this wickedness that has occurred among you? Now therefore deliver up the men, the perverted men who are in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and remove the evil from Israel. But the children of Benjamin would not listen to the voice of their brethren, the children of Israel. Instead, the children of Benjamin gathered together from their cities to Gibeah to go to battle against the children of Israel. And from their cities at that time, the children of Benjamin numbered 26,000 men who drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who numbered 700 select men. Among all this people were 700 select men who were left-handed. Every one could sling a stone at a hair's breadth and not miss. Now, besides Benjamin, the men of Israel numbered 400,000 men who drew the sword, and all of these were men of war. So now you're getting the staging here of 400,000 versus 24,000 men plus 700 going into all of this. Okay, so the leaders and all of the men who are gathered there, other than Benjamin, have determined that justice must be enforced against Gibeah. The leaders of the tribes sent messages to the leaders of Benjamin, and all they're really asking is, support us because we are going to bring justice to men who violently raped this concubine and put her to death in the process. We're asking for justice. That's what the law demands. That's what our nation demands. And we're asking you to deliver these men to us. Benjamin, however, refused to listen. They're not going to accept the demands of their fellow tribes, and instead began to gather and amass their military forces in defiance of what had been deemed necessary by the rest of their tribes to bring justice in the situation. Because they're left-handed. They have a special skill of being able to sling a sling, to twist and throw a stone with a sling, and it's always that the left-handed is unexpected. It's harder to defend against because you expect it to come from a right-handed person, but these are left-handed marksmen. And so just like we saw with the left-handed who killed, I'm trying to think of his name, Ehud, wasn't it? Or in that whole sense, the really fat guy, right? He comes in and he's left-handed, and he's expecting his right hand to be the threat, but he's got his left hand. He grabs the left-handed weapon, and that's how he accomplishes that. So the Benjamites are known for skilled marksmen, with a sling. And you add the left-handed component to it, it makes it even more difficult, I should say, to defend against. And so it's trying to tell us this is one reason why in the first two waves of the battle that Benjamin had the upper hand. Very accurate. We don't know how far away they could be, but they were a hair's breadth. They could sling a stone at a hair's breadth and take somebody out. And again, coming from the left-handed trajectory would have been something that they were not as accustomed to expecting. Yeah. Okay. All right. So despite this numerical disadvantage, right, 26,700 versus 400,000, Benjamin appears to be confident in their military preparations to repel the armies of Israel. They certainly had these 700 skilled men with the stones and all that. All right, so now they're getting, the understanding of what is going to take place is well known on both sides. Benjamin knows that they are going to not give up the men of Gibeah. They're going to go to war. And the men of Israel, who are not of the tribe of Benjamin, are aware they're going to go to battle with the men of Gibeah at least, and also with the men of Benjamin, it seems, a much larger problem. So they're going to seek, thankfully, they're going to seek some wisdom from the Lord, although exactly how that wisdom is communicated, we're not entirely sure. But in Judges 20, verse 18, we read, "Then the children of Israel arose and went up to the house of God to inquire of God. They said, 'Which of us shall go up first to battle against the children of Benjamin?' And Yahweh said, 'Judah first.' So the children of Israel rose in the morning and encamped against Gibeah. And the men of Israel went out to battle against Benjamin. And the men of Israel put themselves in battle array to fight against them at Gibeah. Then the children of Benjamin came out of Gibeah, and on that day cut down to the ground 22,000 men of Israel. And the people, that is the men of Israel, encouraged themselves again and formed the battle line at the place where they had put themselves in array on the first day. And the children of Israel went up and wept before Yahweh until evening, and asked counsel of Yahweh, saying, Shall I again draw near for battle against the children of my brother Benjamin? And Yahweh said, Go up against him. So the children of Israel approached the children of Benjamin on the second day. And Benjamin went out against them from Gibeah on the second day and cut down to the ground 18,000 more of the children of Israel, all who drew the sword. Then all the children of Israel, that is, all the people, went up and came to the house of God and wept. And they sat before Yahweh and fasted that day until evening, and they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And so the children of Israel inquired of Yahweh. The ark of the covenant of God was there in those days, and Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, stood before it in those days, saying, Shall I again go out to battle against the children of my brother Benjamin, or shall I cease? And Yahweh said, Go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into your hand. Okay. So, some things to talk about here for sure. So, since Benjamin was not backing down from this fight, the men of Israel, the leaders of Israel, decided to make an inquiry of Yahweh as to how to prepare. They'd already sort of decided, look, we're going to take 1 out of 10 and 10 out of 100 and 100 out of 1,000 and all that. And we're going to prepare our troops to go into battle. We're going to leave lots of them in reserve, but we're going to go up into battle. But they asked Yahweh, which tribe should go into battle first? And that's interesting. They said first, leaving the option open for more engagements, like they weren't positive that they would be successful in their first wave of assault against the men of Benjamin. Now, is that because they were in a fortified city? Was it because they knew about the strength of their army? We don't know. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it seems like God was pretty more brutal back in those days with those people than he has been to us.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of brute. Yeah.
Which makes me wonder what's really going to happen to us.
Well, we have New Testament promises. Now, all of this can fall into the category. Look, it goes back to there was no king in Israel. Everyone was doing what was right in their eyes. God had every right and had even said that if they disobeyed him, that they would suffer sickness and disease, and they would flee when no one pursues them, and they would die by the hands of their enemies, and they'd be taken captive. He gave them conditions where they were supposed to be protected and have a life that was like a shining beam of light in the world if they just obeyed him. But he gave them consequences if they chose to disobey him. More consequences than those who weren't in that covenant relationship with him in many cases.
But what about those children that he had killed?
Yeah. Well, there's going to be some children who die for sure in here. Yeah, right. I mean, it's a very, this is why when we were, on Sunday mornings at one point in time, we were talking about the different dispensations of God, right? And so, people can ask about the global flood and, why did God bring a global flood and only save 8 people out of, who knows, could be 1 billion or more people. It's a different dispensation, and God is holy and just and all of that, but he can see what we can't see, and that is that some of these people, their trajectory of their life is to be nothing but wicked all the days of their life. That's certainly the case of the pre-flood people, and the way that these Israelites were living and raising their children to serve false pagan gods and Baal and all of that. Okay, we're off in the weeds a little bit here, but that's fine. If we talk about something like this presumed or inferred age of accountability, right? There's a sense that, God taking them before they were at an age of accountability guarantees they go into eternal life with him, Whereas they reach the age of accountability, they become responsible for their own sins, and then he judges them, then their destiny is eternal damnation rather than hell. And so in some way, and this can only be true of God, we can't do it ourselves. I'm going to go, go abort babies, or I'm going to go kill children at a daycare to somehow like guarantee they go to heaven. Only God gets to do that kind of paring out of things. But in some cases, it could be an act of God's mercy to save them from their parents and the influence of them in some of these things. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah.
Can you clarify, the scripture talks about the children of Israel and the children of Benjamin.
Yeah.
It's really not talking about those babies and
No, well, yeah, the phrase when he's talking about children, like children of Benjamin, mean those who are descendant from Benjamin, those who are descendant from Jacob or Israel. He's not talking about youngsters. He's talking about those who have a descendancy, and that's just it's the way that either the Hebrew or the New Testament or Old Testament translators, try to convey what's communicated there. These are the descendants of people from that tribe or this tribe or the nation.
so the only ones really, for the most part, that are dying here are people that can wield the sword, right?
For the most part, we will see that ultimately, again, there's times where God has, in wiping out the Canaanites, God commanded the wiping out of every man, women, and children. And we're going to see that they're going to do the same thing in the city of Gibeah here. They're going to take it all the way down to the nubs. There's nothing left. And that's a choice that they made. But yeah, there is a greater recognition that the value of human life is radically different than what we view it today. But we view it today hopefully through a New Testament lens that goes back and looks at the Old Testament and understands how tragic it is when any human life is lost. And people were considered a lot more expendable in these days. I mean, we've already looked at that. Like, Samson, they take his wife and give him to somebody else, and like, oh, that was a thing, and they burn down the whole house and kill everybody in the house. And there's just this sense of we take it all the way to the extreme, but it's another explanation of both man in this age of how men were so wicked and evil, and also devaluing of human life. And I think even in the most atheistic, anti-God, God-hating communities today, it's still rare that people have such a zero regard for human life. Now, they have very little regard for babies in the womb, but for the most part, yeah, we get, Charlie Kirk gets shot, or, politician gets shot, and these kind of things. But that's such a rare thing. It still hits the news, and we still see these things as, wow, that's really far gone. That wouldn't have, I think if you were living in these days, you're living 1,000 years before Christ, it wouldn't have really been quite that noteworthy, right? Yeah.
Kind of interesting thought here is that the gal's handed over to her master.
Yeah.
Okay, she gets killed. He gets upset. And, well, worthless person now. We've already had 40,000 people die.
Yeah.
60,000
Right.
people die for this worthless person.
Right. Yeah. It's. Yeah.
To say that life doesn't mean something.
Yeah, they are. They're engaged in this battle. But there's going to be a point, I'm trying to rephrase that. But there's a point where they switch from we want justice to we want to kill you guys because you've opposed us. So it went from a legitimate desire to bring justice over the death of this concubine to why, you just killed, 24,000 of our, whatever it was, 18,000 of our guys, and, we're going to, now it's just a full-on battle, and we forgot the reason why we got into it in the first place.
This gal is no Helen of Troy, but we get
Yeah, right. We'll talk about it here. I believe everything that we've seen here is really also considered judgment from God because they are engaging in idolatry. They are engaging in the very things he told them he would bring judgment to them if they didn't do it. So we'll talk about a little bit more of that in a few bullet points here. All right, so they're in this, they're staged for battle, and they ask Yahweh which tribe should go up first, leaving, again, as I said, leaving the option open for more battles to come. Now, it's not clear, how or through whom Yahweh had given them this response, but somehow they understood that Yahweh would approve of Judah being the first to go into battle. Now they may have, we know from other things we've already seen in the Torah, let's say, they may have used things that God helped them to make decisions, like the Urim and the Thummim, right? These things that the high priest held that somehow in some way was a direct communication from God saying, if the Urim does this or the Thummim does this, then that's how you make your decision. Of course, he's also wearing, the high priest would be wearing the breastplate that represents the 12 tribes in stones, and maybe they understood. I'm not saying a stone started glowing, but maybe they understood somehow that that's the one that God was choosing. We're just not told how it was communicated. They may also have understood from other places in the Torah that Judah was the lead tribe, always considered the lead tribe. In Jacob's prophecy, right, the scepter shall not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes. He's the lion, he's the ruling tribe, and he seems to take the lead position. He's the lead tribe that camps on the east, and the east was considered the favored position. And so once again, it seems that multiple avenues, you learn from God that Judah was the leader. They needed to lead their brethren when they go to battle. And Yahweh may have communicated with a priest, or prophet, but no one is mentioned. It's not saying, well, this priest came out and said, well, take Judah, or this man came out and said, I have a word from the Lord, and take Judah as the lead tribe. We're just not told how that communication took place. But Judah then led the battle against Gibeah, but the men of Benjamin cut down 22,000 men of Israel. And I'm going to suggest it's not clear, and maybe it's less likely, that all of the 22,000 men were all from Judah. My guess is they did that pare down, or that pull from each of the 10 tribes. But Judah was either giving the leadership role to bring all these people into battle, or let's say the first 1,000 men were from Judah, but the whole onslaught of people who were going into battle were not from Judah. That's probably what I would say. Again, and based on the fact that Judah does not seem to have been decimated in this first lost encounter. So, nevertheless, regardless of who it was from, they had 400,000 men, and 22,000 die on day one. Is a pretty significant setback. But it says the men of Israel encouraged themselves. They weren't done. They were ready to keep going and fighting against Benjamin. As I said before, it may be we want to bring justice for this Levite and the dead concubine. Now it's transitioned to, they killed 22,000 of our men. We're going back to battle tomorrow. We're not going to let them beat us tomorrow, or whatever the thinking was. But before, and sometime between let's say in the evening hours, more, it seems, they all wept until evening and sought counsel from Yahweh before they went into battle on day 2. Now, note that even if Yahweh instructed them to send Judah first, I want you to take note, he did not state that the result of sending Judah as the lead tribe into battle with Benjamin would give them victory. He just said, send Judah first. Right? He didn't break a promise. He didn't say, I'll give you victory, and then say, sorry, I decided not to at the last minute. He said, send Judah, but he did not promise them victory on day 1. Now, the significant loss could be a consequence of Israel's wickedness, and itself a judgment by Yahweh, and an easy victory by Judah over, let's say Judah or the Israel over Benjamin, could have easily been misinterpreted as Israel being blessed, or interpreting it as being blessed, despite the fact that they're engaged in everything that God abhors, right? They're engaged in idolatry. They're engaged in Baal worship. They're engaged in sexual immorality, and they're not obeying the Torah, and they're not offering the sacrifices that they're called to offer, and all kinds of things. And so if they just kind of come in and wipe out the Benjamites on day one, they go, wow, we must really have God's favor. No, there's no king in Israel, and everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes. That's the flavor of the book of Judges, these last several chapters. So they needed a little bit of, or a big bunch of God's correction, his discipline, his rebuke over them, just as much as the men of Gibeah and the men of of Benjamin did, because they're not living righteously before him. Okay, then we saw the second day was nearly as bad for Israel as the first day. Benjamin, we're not even told about any of Benjamin's losses, but Benjamin then cuts down another 18,000 men from Israel, seemingly with minimal loss to themselves. Then, once again, after day 2, all the men of Israel went up to the house of Yahweh. This is the tabernacle that Moses had constructed in the wilderness. They go up to the house of Yahweh, and they weep before him after losing, what is now 40,000 men in 2 days, right? So they've lost 40,000 in 2 days, thinking this was going to be an easy victory. They started out with 400,000. They lost 40,000. That's a pretty substantial drop in what's going on. Yeah. After this show of reverence to God, with humility, Israel again inquired of Yahweh about going into battle, or if they should cease from this quest for the justice that they were on. And then having offered, the requirements like the burnt offerings and the other offerings that they offer, and weeping before God and sort of coming to him in humility, now, after day 2, before day 3, Yahweh told them to go up to battle, because now I will deliver Benjamin into your hands, right? So it's the first time he made that promise. And it makes me think that Yahweh was judging all of Israel, while he's also going to allow them to bring judgment that's necessary and right on the men of Gibeah and on the Benjamites who are constantly, opposing their brethren's actual, legitimate, and valid reason for seeking justice. Okay, so let's look at the battle that happens here. This will cover the rest of chapter 20. We'll see the men of Judah actually having victory over the men of Benjamin. So starting in verse 29. Then Israel set men in ambush all around Gibeah. And the children of Israel went up against the children of Benjamin on the third day and put themselves in battle array against Gibeah, as at the other times. So the children of Benjamin went out against the people and were drawn away from the city. They began to strike down and kill some of the people, as at the other times, in the highways, one of which goes up to Bethel, and the other to Gibeah, and in the field about 30 men of Israel. So they had some initial victories. And the children of Benjamin said, they are defeated before us as at the first. But the children of Israel said, let us flee and draw them away from the city to the highways. So all the men of Israel rose from their place and put themselves in battle array at Baal Tamar. Then Israel's men in ambush burst forth from their position in the plain of Gibeah. Of Geba. Then 10,000 select men from Israel came against Gibeah, and the battle was fierce. But the Benjamites did not know that disaster was upon them. Yahweh defeated Benjamin before Israel, and the children of Israel destroyed that day 25,100 Benjamites of all who draw the sword. So the children of Benjamin saw that they were defeated, and the men of Israel had given ground to the Benjamites, because they relied on men in ambush who had set against Gibeah. And the men in ambush quickly rushed upon Gibeah, and the men in ambush spread out and struck the whole city with the edge of the sword. Now the appointed signal between the men of Israel and the men in ambush was that they would make a great cloud of smoke rise up from the city, whereupon the men of Israel would turn in battle. Now Benjamin had begun to strike and kill about 30 men of Israel. That's the same ones as earlier. For they said, surely they are defeated before us as in the first battle. But when the cloud began to rise from the city in a column of smoke, the Benjamites looked behind them, and there was their whole city going up in smoke to heaven. And when the men of Israel turned back, the men of Benjamin panicked, for they saw that disaster had come upon them. Therefore, they turned their backs before the men of Israel in the direction of the wilderness, but the battle overtook them, and whoever came out of the cities they destroyed in their midst. And they surrounded the Benjamites, chased them, and easily trampled them down as far as the front of Gibeah towards the east. And 18,000 men of Benjamin fell, and all of these were men of valor. Then they turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and they cut down 5,000 of them on the highways. Then they pursued them relentlessly up to Gidom and killed 2,000 of them. So all who fell of Benjamin that day were 25,000 men who drew the sword. All of these were men of valor. But 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and they stayed at the rock of Rimmon for 4 months. And the men of Israel turned back against the children of Benjamin, struck them down with the edge of the sword from every city, men and beasts, all who were found. They also set fire to their cities that they came to. All right. So a different strategy this day, and you could say, well, maybe that was the Lord helping them with a better strategy plan, or maybe they came up with it on their own, but knew from the promises that had already been given that this day would be victorious compared to the first 2 days. So in addition to receiving a favorable word that Yahweh would give them victory, the men of Israel devised, as I said, a different strategy against Benjamin than what they had unsuccessfully attempted to use on the first 2 days. First, Israel set themselves up in an ambush. So they took their men and they put an ambush grouping of men up out of the city, so that as the Benjamites fled out of the city in pursuit of men of Israel, thinking they had victory, then they would pounce on them from this ambush position. Okay. So that was the second wave, the wave that would hit them. But they put the first group of men in the same array as they did on day 1 and the same array as they did on day 2, so that the men of Benjamin would go, well, that didn't work very well for them on day 1, didn't work for them on day 2. We're going to get them on day 3 just as easily. So the men of Benjamin were confident that they could easily defeat Israel once again on the 3rd day, just as they had done before. And at first, Benjamin was in fact seeming to be successful, striking down about 30 men of Israel. These are pawns in the game here, if you will, and gave them more confidence in their strategy that day. But so in trying to demonstrate that, oh, Benjamin, you've got us again, the men of Israel fled away from the city in order to draw the Benjamites away from their post of protecting the city of Gibeah, where everyone was amassed. With no forces remaining to protect Gibeah, they just thought, well, let's just chase them and maybe we'll be done with battle. If we chase them away and strike them down as they're fleeing away, then maybe we won't have to go to battle on day 4. Maybe that'll be the end of things. Okay? So they left no forces to protect the city. And then, having left no forces, other men from Israel rush into the city, and they strike down all of its inhabitants. Yes, I think that means women and children, especially based on what we'll see in the next chapter. So some managed to flee to highways and towards the men who were waiting at Baal Tamar to ambush the men of Benjamin as they passed by. So as the highway opened up into the plain of Geba, 10,000 men of Israel leaped out of their hiding places and engaged in a fierce battle with Benjamin, who had been fleeing from that place. So even while outnumbered, the Benjamites did not realize that the battle for their city had been lost until they saw the smoke rising from the city that they were believing they were defending. Now, I just want to make sure we understand. So this is common. Several of us have been in these studies before and know this. It's common in Hebrew to tell the story in a broad sense first, and then come back and give you more details. So tell the same story with additional details. And so it kind of told the story twice, right? They struck down about 30 men from Israel. They're chasing them, and they get there, and they get in this ambush. Okay. Well, that was the big picture. what wasn't told in the big picture was, oh, by the way, other men from Israel had managed to then breach into the city, strike all the inhabitants dead, light the city on fire, and then the men who have been chasing the Israelites up into the valley, they look back and they say, oh, the city that we were defending is on fire, and it distracts them from the battle, and then those men from Israel are able to not only easily defeat the Benjamites, they weren't even paying attention. They were completely focused on what the smoke that was arising out of their city. So they were distracted by their city that had been set ablaze, and the initial success that Benjamin thought they had quickly turns from this battle between Benjamin and Israel. Benjamin was then crushed and defeated. All of their forces were defeated that day, with the exception of 600 who were already in the highway and managed to escape. So the writer here gives Yahweh the credit for the victory that destroyed the 25,000 men from Benjamin, all who drew the sword. Now, I'll walk through the count of that. You've already seen it, but here's the count. This is, again, the summary of everything that happened. 18,000 were killed right in the main battle, okay? And then after that, 5,000 were killed along the highways because they were either fleeing into the battle to try and engage Israel before they saw the smoke, or fleeing away from their attackers once they realized that their entire strategy had been defeated, and now they're in deep trouble, okay? And then finally, the last 2,000 were chased down by Israel and killed so that they did not escape this punishment and the consequences that they brought upon themselves. Now, realize that all of that could have been avoided if the sinful men of Gibeah had just been given up. We wouldn't have lost the 40,000 from Israel, and we wouldn't have necessarily lost the 25,100 or whatever from Benjamin on this third day. So it would only been the men of Gibeah, but that's not what they chose to do, and we see significant loss of life as a result of all of that. Now, Benjamin started the battle with 26,700 soldiers, and we learned that from chapter 20, verse 15. And in the end of the sequence, with no more than about 1,600 men remaining alive, Israel began the process of exterminating the rest of their cities and their people everywhere else as well. In the final analysis, then, only 600 men from Benjamin were confirmed to remain with the entire tribe. They started, I'll just give you the census, and we talked about it a little bit last week. I did not have any of these numbers in my head, but if you go back to Numbers chapter 1, Benjamin came out of Egypt with 35,400 men, and they entered the promised land under Joshua with 45,600 men. Okay, so they grew, 10,000 men or so over the course of that 40-year time in the wilderness. Other tribes lost, but Benjamin grew pretty strong, actually, nicely. So in the mop-up operations, Israel burned every city in Benjamin, killed all of their livestock, and likely killed every person. Yes, again, as I said, meaning women and children were all killed in this sort of mop-up operation. Vengeance and rage and all of that. They've lost, the men of Israel lost 40,000 men, and they're in this annihilation campaign practically against the people of Benjamin. So this is pretty clear that, in other words, Benjamin was nearly eradicated based on this series of events over, this period of time, at least 3 days, of course, or on day 3, and then the mop-up operations after that. So the men of Gibeah were wicked, and I want to just unpack all that. The men of Gibeah were wicked, right? And they took their crimes to such a level that capital punishment was warranted. Old Testament, I'd say even in the New Testament, what they did warrants a death penalty, and so they engaged in that, and they should have been punished. But the rest of Benjamin should have agreed to allow justice to come to their brothers, yes, but to these men of Gibeah. but foolishly opposed the numerically superior forces of their brethren. I'm just not sure how they ever thought that their 25,000 or 30,000 people could defeat the 400,000 from Israel, but they certainly, inflicted significant wounds in the process, but it was foolish and futile in my mind before they ever started. Now, the men of Gibeah were guilty, but after Israel defeated Benjamin, the rest of these 12 or 11 tribes of Israel, their attempt to wipe out an entire tribe from Israel seems to be an ungodly response to needing justice for the concubine and the Levite and the men of Gibeah, right? So everybody takes everything way too far, and we see that everyone is wicked and doing what is right in their own eyes is the theme of this book. We're not supposed to be uplifted and encouraged by the choices and decisions that people make in the book of Judges. We're supposed to be occasionally impressed that somebody manages to show some righteousness in the midst of all of this wickedness, but we're supposed to be greatly grieved and troubled by how quickly Israel descended from Moses, this incredibly powerful moral leader over them, with God's blessing, seeing the cloud in the wilderness by day and the fire by night and the manna and all the miracles from drinking water from a rock and all these things. They should have been fully committed and surrendered to God, and instead they engage in all this wickedness, and we see the tragic results of men not surrendering and submitting ourselves, our hearts, our lives to God. And this is really what the message of Judges is mostly about, certainly in the epilogue, the last 5 chapters. Okay, so having nearly eradicated this entire tribe of Benjamin, we see that we had 600 who remained alive. They had fled and hadn't been pursued and killed. And now we're going to see immediately a change of heart from the men of Israel saying, what did we just do? Okay, I mean, it's like, you go home and say, great victory. We practically wiped out, sent everybody out of the land of Benjamin. They go home and sleep on it for a night, and they go, what did we just do? God promised us that we'd have 12 tribes of Israel. We just took one of them out. Okay, so reading through chapter 21, it's a somewhat short chapter. We'll read through it, and that'll close us out for the book of Judges. So 21, verse 1. Now the men of Israel had sworn an oath at Mizpah, saying, none of us shall give his daughter to Benjamin as a wife. Then the people came to the house of God and remained there before God till evening. And they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly and said, O Yahweh, God of Israel, why has this come to pass in Israel, that today there should be one tribe missing in Israel? So it was on the next morning that the people rose early and built an altar there and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. Then the children of Israel said, who is there among all the tribes of Israel who did not come up with the assembly to Yahweh? For they had made a great oath concerning anyone who had not come up to Yahweh at Mizpah, saying, he shall surely be put to death. And the children of Israel grieved for Benjamin their brother and said, one tribe is cut off from Israel today. What shall we do for wives for those who remain, seeing we have sworn by Yahweh that we will not give them our daughters as wives? And they said, what one is there from the tribes of Israel who did not come up to Mizpah to the Lord? And in fact, no one has come to the no one had come to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For when the people were counted, indeed, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. So the congregation sent out 12,000 of their most valiant men and commanded them, saying, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, including the women and the children. And this is the thing you shall do. You shall utterly destroy every male and every woman who has known a man intimately. So they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man intimately, and they brought them to the camp of Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. Then the whole congregation sent word to the children of Benjamin who were at the rock of Rimmon and announced peace to them. So Benjamin came back at that time, and they gave them the women that they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead, and they had not found enough for them. And the people grieved for Benjamin because Yahweh had made a void in the tribes of Israel. Then the elders of the congregation said, "What shall we do for wives for those who remain, since the women of Benjamin have been destroyed?" And they said, "There must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that the tribe may not be destroyed from Israel. However, we cannot give them wives from our daughters, for the children of Israel have sworn an oath, saying, 'Cursed is the one who gives a wife to Benjamin.'" Then they said, "In fact, there is a yearly feast of Yahweh in Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem and south to Lebona. Therefore, they instructed the children of Benjamin, saying, "Go, lie in wait in the vineyards, and watch. And just when the daughters of Shiloh come out to perform their dances, then come out from the vineyards, and every man catch a wife for himself from the daughters of Shiloh, and then go to the land of Benjamin. Then it shall be, when their fathers and their brothers come and complain, that we will say to them, 'Be kind to them for our sake, because we did not take a wife for any of them in the war. For it is not as though you have given the women to them at this time, making yourself guilty of your oath.' And the children of Benjamin did so, and they took enough wives for the number of those who danced and whom they caught. And they went and returned to their inheritance, and they rebuilt cities and dwelt in them. So the children of Israel departed from there at that time, and every man to his tribe and his family, and they went out from there, every man to his inheritance. In those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes." All right. Well, let me walk through this with you. There's a couple of very interesting tidbits in here that I like to make sure we talk about. So after this victory, the men of Israel swore an oath that, so they're so angry, they're so incensed at the tribe of Benjamin that they wipe out pretty much everyone they can. They apparently are aware that 600 of them had fled to this rock of Rimmon, and they go, "But nobody give them a daughter." Okay, no, I mean, if anyone gives them a daughter as a wife, that person will be put to death. It's a violation of a vow that we're making here today. So it's another indication that the 600 men were all that remained of Benjamin. There was no more children. There's no more women. Of Benjamin, there's just these 600 men who remain. So they did a nearly thorough job of eradicating the tribe. It also indicates the hatred and resolve at that moment that the battle had ended to destroy Benjamin entirely, because Israel, because of what happened to this Levite concubine, right? We talked about that all night long. Okay, and so they're angry, they're incensed, they don't want another Benjaminite on the planet ever again, at least in that moment. And so they're going to deny them. They're basically let them die off in a generation. Okay, those guys are hiding. We don't have to go kill them. If we just let them starve to death or let them die of old age, they'll never, ever, Benjamin will be no more, even when that occurs. But later, some of the people of Israel came to the house of God, which is at Bethel, and remained there until evening, seeking to know what the will of Yahweh would be now that they have done all of this very violent action against one of the tribes of Israel. And so once again, the people lift up their voice and they weep and bitterly in response to their own actions, to having attempted to wipe out Benjamin, and then secondarily to make this oath to ensure that they would die within a generation if they didn't have any way of reproducing and having offspring. So the next morning, they built an altar. They made burnt offerings and peace offerings to Yahweh, seemingly or perhaps feeling the weight of the guilt that they had overreacted. We went too far. Yes, I think we all agree that they did. It then occurred to those who were gathered there that there might be a loophole to be exploited to restore Benjamin despite everything that we have done. Now, I will tell you, historically, and this is true right up to the very day today, Israel loves loopholes. They love to find loopholes in the law. They love to find loopholes to try and figure out. I'm not trying to be ethnically unsensitive or insensitive here. Just saying, there's and this kind of thing comes when God tells them that they need to let the land lie fallow for 7 years. And one of their strategies to find a loophole is say, well, if we lease it to a Gentile, he can work it for that 7th year, give us the proceeds back, and then the next year we'll use our land again. Like the land never lies fallow. They've just found a loophole. Well, this is another loop, actually 2 loopholes that they find here. So the first one, they were like, okay, we need a loophole. Wait a minute, if one city in Israel, all of Israel, didn't send men up to Mizpah to be with us when we were making this decision and gathering men to go to war, we commanded every man to come. If they didn't come, we can go kill them. And they probably have some virgins in their cities. So if we go kill them and take the virgins for the Benjamites, hey, we found a loophole. We give them women, they get to have offspring, and we didn't violate our oath, and we fix our problem that we created for ourselves. So they begin to inquire, and if anyone was not present during that oath to deny Benjamin their daughters, then that group could technically offer their daughters without violating the oath, but also they had made an oath again against these men. So those who openly violated the oath had to be put to death, right? If they violated this oath not to give daughters, they would be put to death. So your population opportunity for providing women is shrunk down dramatically. You got to find somebody who was not involved in the battle and not involved with the oath. So since Jabesh Gilead did not come to participate in the battle, and they were also absent when this oath was sworn, so both conditions, therefore this small pocket of Israel represented the loophole that Israel said we can exploit that for our own restoration of the tribe of Benjamin. So in another sordid display of Israel's wickedness, Israel sent 12,000 valiant men to Jabesh Gilead to strike all of the inhabitants of that city with the edge of the sword because they refused to participate in the battle, right? And that was what they had sworn. And so now we have another city that's basically getting wiped out, man, woman, children, everybody in the city. All the men of the city were killed. All the women of the city were killed, except anyone who had not known a man, a virgin, and all the children of the city were killed. And having completed their violent assault on Jabesh Gilead, they gathered 400 virgin women from that city and brought them to the camp in Shiloh at Canaan so that they could reunite them with the men who were hiding at the rock of Rimmon. So then they send a message of peace to the 600 men who were then now living there, and we don't know how long this has been, but they were up there at the rock of Rimmon and told them, hey, the battle's over. We're no longer your enemy. We want to send a message of peace. In fact, we want you to come back to your land, and we want you to make sure that you pass on your descendancy in the tribe of Benjamin. So we're gonna help you with that. And so they send a message of peace to them. Now the men of Benjamin, and I think wisely, accepted the offer of peace from their brethren, and they recognized that there's at least 400 virgins for the 600 men who were hiding there. So we've fixed about 2/3 of the problem, if you will. Okay, right? So fix that. Despite using this loophole, however, the men of Israel continued to grieve for their brethren of the Benjamites, because now you still have 1/3 of them, or 200 of the 600, not fully, they're not out of danger. We need more wives, we need more offspring to kind of rebuild Benjamin. They were at 45,000, now they're 600. We got to build them back up. So at least 1/3 of the survivors did not have an option to take a wife. And I'm leaving room that some men may have taken more than one wife and leaving more than 200 who didn't have a wife, right? Therefore, the men of Israel strategized an alternative plan to get more women for them. But again, they needed to violate a loophole. They needed to exploit a loophole, so they wouldn't violate the oath not to give a daughter. So they need seemingly at least 200 more virgins to give to the Benjamites. So they were aware now, somebody said, hey, you know what? There's an annual feast that happens in Shiloh where the women, meaning virgins, come out to dance in celebration We won't have to get into all of that. It's just they were there dancing, and they knew that there would be virgin daughters of the men at Shiloh that would be targets, if you will. Okay, so they instructed the bachelors, let's say these guys who didn't get a wife the first go around, from Benjamin, to go and snatch, take a wife for themselves from these women from Shiloh. And here's the loophole. Here's how you get around the loophole. See, if the men of Shiloh gave their daughters, well, then they have to be put to death for violating the oath. But if the Benjamites somehow snatched a daughter and take her home with him, then no one gave his daughter to be their wife, and so, hey, we found a loophole. So you guys lie in wait, watch them dance, go snatch one off the dance floor, take her home, make her your wife, and we'll go tell the men of Shiloh, just close your eyes and let this happen. You're not going to get killed because you didn't violate the oath, and we need to rebuild the tribal population of Benjamin. So we found a loophole, and you're the lucky winners of our loophole contest. So the men of Israel were also prepared for the objections that these men of Shiloh might have, and they just kind of told, be kind to Benjamin. We need to exploit this loophole to get this problem fixed. And the plan worked. So in the end, every man of these 600 from Benjamin were able to take a wife or wives. There may have been some polygamy going on. To repopulate their very now depleted tribe so that they could survive. And they did. And, all 12 tribes survive. And we see that even all the way through into the book of Revelation, chapter 7. The tribe of Benjamin is, in fact, represented in the final analysis of everything. So they almost went to full decimation, but this finding loopholes worked in bringing about the restoration of a tribe. Although, again, they were really never very prominent in size following this event. And, of course, the whole book concludes with, in those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Let's talk about why that phrase is so meaningful now that we've studied all 21 chapters of this very kind of heavy book to go through. Now, Israel, so there was supposed to be a king in Israel. His name is Yahweh. Yahweh was declared as the king of Israel, and they rejected him. When the phrase says there was no king in Israel before there was a king like King Saul or King David, it's because Israel said, God, Yahweh, we don't want you as our king. That's the first true indication we've got a major problem here. They should have had Yahweh as their king. They should have recognized that and declared that openly. Now, the judges were mostly impotent to prevent the wickedness and idolatry of their people, right? I mean, so even if you take a relatively good judge, whether it's Deborah and Barak, or whether it's Gideon, or whether it's Jephthah or whatever, some of these ones who seem to have more of a pedigree of doing right, did they really, really have a moral influence on Israel? Or did God just use them to flee, to get the Canaanites and the oppression away from them, or the Philistine oppression away from them, or whatever it may be? Really, God just brought up a judge. They got deliverance from their oppression, but Israel went right back into idolatry, and God came back and brought them into, bondage once again with their, neighbors, bringing them under bondage. And so the judges were effectively impotent to be able to have any kind of moral character change over the people. So judges are not a good substitute for the king that was needed, right? I mean, David and Solomon and Josiah and a few others, had a little bit of influence of trying to get Israel back to their moral, roots that God had instilled for them. But, these judges, it's not there. The whole book of Judges is not, Israel going back up to moral decency and then falling back down. It's God okay, I'll let you have some freedom for a while. I'll let this judge give you freedom by delivering you, but you're going to go right back into it, or not even change your level of wickedness and idolatry that you're engaged in. Now, a king would have the authority to enforce God's laws and even make his own law, but precious few kings in Israel actually constrained idolatry in the nation and the wickedness of the nation. Just kind of made mention of that. And doing what seems right to us, this is something that we should all take from the book of Judges, is that doing what seems right to us is meaningless unless it first conforms to God's standards and God's expectations for how we surrender our lives to him. Okay, so we've got to get over that, and of course Jeremiah 17:9, man should never trust his own eyes or trust his own heart to determine what is morally correct. What we should do is look to the perfect, pure, holy Word of God to determine what we should do. Doing what is right in our own eyes, God is trying to show us in the book of Judges, is a recipe for disaster. We have to follow his commands. We have to follow his laws if we want to, be in the moral high ground that he wants us to inhabit. He says, be holy, for I am holy, right? He tells us how to live and calls us to these very things. So we need to take away from the book of Judges a big lesson for us is don't do what's right in our own eyes, do what's right in God's eyes, right? And it shouldn't be unclear, it shouldn't be difficult because he's given us the moral standards to live by. And don't forget, God is not unwilling to judge his people who turn into sin against him, right? He brings judgment upon them. We see 40,000 men die because they're unrighteous and they're engaged in unrighteousness. We saw, and then we saw the 24,000 die or 25,000 die from Benjamin because they're engaged in unrighteousness, and God brings judgment. It's trying to bring wake-up call to all of us that our hearts are wicked and deceitful above all things, and we need to let God reign and rule over us. No.
You were saying 26,000
Yeah.
died, when in fact there might have been 100,000.
Yeah, exact. Because I'm counting soldiers, not others.
These people died because of the one concubine, and then they're thinking,
Well,
we shouldn't have done that. Let's go ahead and give them 400 of our virgins.
yeah. So, right. And I mean, mathematically, you can say that it's, one concubine and you end up with the loss of 60 some odd thousand people. But in reality, the one concubine represents the moral collapse of the nation, and God is going to bring about some levels of justice, which is, again, why I believe day 1 and day 2, Israel got decimated, and day 3, Benjamin got decimated, because it's a nation of wickedness and God is bringing justice to them. He wants to wake them up, and they occasionally did. After they practically eradicate Benjamin, then they go to the house of God, then they offer burnt offerings, then they make peace offerings, then they seek God's wisdom and say, what shall we do, right? And then, but that's one night out of 400 years where they spend a little time seeking the Lord's will. Most of their time is totally wicked, and the one concubine is just like a litmus test of how bad Israel is and how much God himself was fully justified in wiping them out like he promised he could, but he didn't because he loves them and because he had a plan and a purpose for them and for us through them.
So it seems that back in those days, if you got
Slow learners, yeah.
injured in armor battle or even sprained an ankle and couldn't defend yourself,
Yeah.
there was no prisoners.
Yeah.
You just died.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not hospitals, and there's not ambulances, and there's not, you're, yeah.
At least with the enemy.
Yeah, I can't even hardly myself imagine what it was like to pick up a sword and go into battle when you figure probably a 90% chance that you either come out dead or lame for life. I mean, it just seems like a horrible existence. But I didn't grow up in that world. I didn't grow up knowing that that it's the fight or be killed.
Well,
Yeah, yeah. And if it's not your brothers bringing justice for your wickedness, it's the Canaanites or it's the Philistines or it's the Romans or it's whoever else who does all these things. It's just the world prior to us is a whole lot of different kind of life. Short lifespans, people living to 30 and 40, not 60 and 80 and 100, and people dying in battles that are just horrific and bloody beyond description. So, anyway, hope you enjoyed it. If you could close out to say, the plan is to go through the book of Galatians, which is not so dark and heavy, although there's problems in the book of Galatians, starting on January 13th, I believe it is. So it's, next week is Christmas week. Week after that's New Year's week. Week after that's Seek week. Week after that, we'll get back together for Galatians. So enjoy the rest of your end of the year holiday seasons and all that. So be blessed. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate your support.